I absolutely love developing talent, and I set up Futureneers back in 2017, and it was about developing today's young talent into tomorrow's leaders, future leader pioneers. So what we do is we help leaders to create courageous, compassionate workplaces where everyone thrives, and that's what I love most about my work.
You know what I love? The energy and passion in your voice, which just projects how passionate you are about your work. So we said that today we want to talk about feedback and how to establish the culture of feedback. And in our preparation, we decided that we want to do this interview in 4 sections. So let's start in the beginning. And I would like to ask you, what do you think is the main purpose of feedback?
I suppose for me, feedback is all about alignment of the company strategy and behaviors. So all companies have clear strategic priorities, and they have the values and the how of how to be a great team and create a great company. So for me, feedback is all about aligning those company values and also those company strategic priorities. So helping people to really get clarity around what's expected of them in that space. So that I think that's the essence of feedback for me.
Great. So if we talk about feedback, then we're basically talking, at least in my opinion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, about at least 2 aspects. So the praise, which is basically connected with encouraging certain behaviors, and criticism that should be constructive, so that is intended for correction of attitude and behavior as well. So how do you see this praise and criticism in connection with values and strategic goals?
I love that too, the dichotomy between the praise and that kind of alignment of improving behaviors. So praise, yes, is about banking the successes that you're doing and sharing that. So that recognition is so important. And as we know, I think it is 73% of people will go above and beyond the call of duty in terms of their role if they are truly seen, truly recognized for the value they bring. So that's where the praise comes from. So for feedback, it's positive feedback. It's strength-based feedback, really outlining what you appreciate about someone. So that's really important. And the other side of it is improving and correcting some old behaviors or bad behaviors that potentially are impacting on their role and on their performance. So it's how you actually align that. So really what's really important is really understanding what is expected of that person. So 51% of people are not clear on what's expected of them. That's the challenge, and that's the challenge for managers. And as you know, and as we all know from Gallup research, that 70% of engagement is down to the manager. So it's really down to the manager to help to support their team members to really ensure that they are clear on what's expected. And we do that through feedback. Simple as.
Thank you so much. So I'm impressed by the numbers. So more than 50% of people are not clear on what they're supposed to be doing. And feedback is the best tool to get that conversation going, to get that clarity. I also remember in our preparation, we talked about the word itself. So feedback, and how feedback is basically like food. And I would love for our listeners to know more about this concept and how you see it.
Because I love that when we talked about that, because it is like feeding. So it's actually giving fuel for someone, engaging them, and I suppose giving them an opportunity to really reflect on what they're doing, and actually giving them the opportunity to get more energy and more motivation by getting feedback. So that feed is that fuel for being better, fuel for getting alignment in that space. So that feed is really important, and that fuel that we give, and the power that has in that motivation of your team or of the company in that space. So giving that powerful feedback, that recognition, so that's a positive piece, and it actually gives you a hit of dopamine, which is really important. Gives you that lovely chemical bath of positive reinforcement. So it's all based on research. So it's not a nice to have, it's fundamental. And that's really crucial. Okay, so that's the feedback. But then when we think about feed forward, it's about then aligning and making sure that you're clear on what's their next steps and helping them, not to tell them what's wrong, but provide that clarity, as you said, clarity of expectation to align with the strategic priorities or the behaviors of how to move forward, how to perform in a better way. That's what feedback is. So I feel that, and we always talk about feedback to feed forward. That's the powerful, not to focus on the past, but actually focus on the future and moving that forward.
Feedback for clear future. So I just love this concept, just connecting it with food and with fuel, because that's what it is. And you already mentioned that it's connected with values and strategic goals. So it's really not supposed to be that personal. Yet a lot of people take feedback, especially criticism, so personal. And I would just like to explore with you, why do you think that is?
I think the power, see, we do go into the personal. If we talk about it, then we get into the personality, gets into, you take it on as a personal, criticism or a personal thing that you feel. When you connect it with the strategic goals of what's expected of you, so what it is you're trying to do, but also the behaviors. I find we know that 100% of companies have values, and we know that, okay? But and they have them on the wall, they have them on their books in terms of journals. But sometimes what's really missing is the operationalizing of those behaviors, and only 11% of companies operationalize their behaviors. So
how much? 11,
yeah. So people feel and they say, well, we have them up on the wall, Kira. We have them around our offices, or now in remote working, they're on our desktop. But are we really operationalizing? Are we bringing them into our ways of working, our daily ways of working? And that's the power of feedback, is to help your team to really understand how to align their behaviors to the company behaviors in that space and make it aware. It's awareness. I love the quote that we always talk about with Deepak Chopra is, awareness gives you energy. So that awareness, and what we're doing with feedback is we're giving them the awareness to understand, okay, the impact and potentially where we're going with this, but intention transforms. So awareness gives you energy, intention transforms. So intention is, where are you coming from? So when you talk about being personal and getting into, I'm not comfortable in this space, but it's creating that psychological safety, Sabina. It's creating that safe space that when you are delivering powerful feedback and meaningful feedback, it's coming from a positive intent. So that it's not a negative piece. I'm talking to you, I'm sharing a piece of feedback to really give you an insight into where I would love you to go. And just let's align on that. Let's align on your behaviors and share a bit of what's happening and move that forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You basically made a really wonderful transition into our section number 2, where my main question is, how to create that environment, how to create those conditions for feedback to be taken for what it is, a gift, and let's keep it there. How to create those conditions for feedback.
I suppose the first one, as I mentioned, is psychological safety, creating that safe space for everybody to be heard, and that's really important. Is that, and I think even in this environment of remote working, there's a sense of invisibility. There's a sense of sometimes I'm not really being seen. I'm not being seen for what I'm actually truly doing in the workplace, because you're not in the office, you're not seeing in that space. So it's actually creating that opportunity for people to be truly seen in that space. And that psychological safety helps that, because you are feeling free. You're feeling safe to speak up. You're feeling safe to actually discuss difficult conversations or difficult topics. So creating that, and that's really crucial for a team and a team lead and a manager to create that space, that sense of trust that we're in it together. And we always talk about the power of moving from a me concept, so me, to the we. So that benefit mindset is so important, is that we're doing this together and it's for the greater good. And that brings us to a bigger conversation, which is about the company and what is it, how can we support the goals, but also support you in that growth.
So psychological safety condition number one, feeling like you can speak up, do mistakes, and just trust each other. Another thing that would be interesting to explore when we talk about conditions for feedback is this recipient part. So how do I, as a recipient of the feedback, how do I see it? What's my relationship towards feedback? Can you perhaps share a bit more insight in that perspective?
Yeah, and this is really important is when you're framing, when you're having a kind of a really powerful conversation and that meaningful conversation around feedback, it's to ensure that it is this clear intent, a positive intent. So as a recipient, to know why this person is giving you feedback. But what's really interesting and what we're exploring even more is to create that space where the recipient has the power to align as well and to feedback as well and say, okay, because a lot of managers sometimes I find may not mean to demotivate. So 74% people have reviewed that or said that they leave their conversation with their managers demotivated. Okay. So the power here is that if that's the case, then they have a role. There's a two-way kind of partnership in this space. So they may leave demotivated because they're either, okay, it was delivered in the wrong way. Okay, so that's one piece. But also it's about, I'm not really clear on what that feedback was about. Like how many times have we got, okay, I got feedback and I'm not sure exactly. So the role here of a recipient is to come back and say, okay, so I'm not 100% clear. What exactly do you mean by the feedback you're giving? Give me the examples, but also for you to have an opportunity to reframe the feedback so that it makes it more meaningful for me, for my role. Okay. And also what's really important is to agree tracking progress. So what do we do afterwards? So how will I know that I'm actually on the right track, or how do I build into that space? So yeah, it's really important that alignment, that it's not just about the giver of feedback, it's about the recipient being part of the conversation and feeling part of that partnership.
Really valid points. One other thing, since you're on a roll with insights, how do you switch a person that is being defensive? When you get, let's say, criticism and you're like, yeah, but this, I wanted to do it like that. Or when they start getting defensive, to get them in the state of mind where they would actually want to know more and clarify the feedback that they're getting, instead of feeling that they need to protect themselves. Any ideas on how we can switch that mindset?
I love to explore it as being curious. Let's get curious around this space. What's coming up for you? And if there is defensiveness, it's more about, okay, so how do we actually reframe it so that we get curious about this space? Because it is not a black and white scenario here. One's wrong, nobody's right, or nobody's wrong. It's how do we actually come and align together to come up with a game plan or an action plan that will support you in moving that forward. So I find it's getting into the driving seat of your own life when it comes into that, but you're not the passenger here. So it's okay, so how do we get you into the driving seat? So, okay, so what is coming up for you? Get curious. That curiosity is such a powerful tool and mindset to have, and it's not to be afraid to go into that curious zone.
Okay, so instead of defending yourself, try to be curious and try to be intrigued by the feedback and explore where the person is coming from. Obviously, if there is this psychological safety aspect and good intention from the person who is giving feedback.
Yeah, it's crucial, Sabina, as you know, is that it's the feedback giver needs to create that positive intent. The why. Why are we asking? Why are we sharing this? And why are you sharing this? So that if you create that safe space before you even start delivering some of the feedback, that's really important. And we talk about that in terms of that framework we use with feedback. But that framing and that preparation at the beginning of the conversation is so crucial. I find when you do that really well, the defensiveness doesn't come. It's when you go straight into, I saw this, this is not what you're doing. It's coming from a scarcity model of what's happening, what's wrong with you. And I suppose both of us are strengths coaches in that space. So we come from a strengths-based philosophy of what's right with the person. So let's start with what you appreciate about them first. And then let's get into what we want more of and less of.
Great. So that brings me back. That brings me actually to section number 3. And you said that what can potentially go wrong is how you deliver that feedback, and now you emphasize the importance of the preparation for the feedback.
Yes.
So my question now is, do you have some good techniques or a technique that you would share with us how to give feedback in the right way so it encourages curiosity and not defensiveness?
Absolutely. And how we structure it, we have a kind of a 4-step process. So the first step is about the prep. It's the preparation. It's the framing. It's the why. So, and it also is getting really, I suppose, reflecting. So for the feedback giver to reflect before they even have that conversation is, why am I having this conversation? Why am I noticing this? And what is it? How are we going to connect that to the company goals and the values and behaviors in that space? So frame it, get really clear on the end state. What would you like to see? Okay. And in that, so when you get into that and start sharing that in that conversation with that person, it's really defining it in an end state. So end state is what I would like to see in that space, okay? And looking at the behaviors and all the positive things, that's where I would like to see. So that's the preparation piece, okay? And framing it in that space. And then we get into the ask piece, and this is asking what they think, but also it is also actively listening. So that's where you can avoid the defensiveness. Is actually, well, this is what I'm seeing. So I'm framing it. This is what I'm seeing, and then I'm asking, well, what do you think? What is coming up for you? And actively listening, not coming in for solutions and telling them what to do. The telling doesn't work. It's a coaching conversation. That's what feedback is about. So we need to get comfortable in that space of creating a coaching conversation as opposed to a telling conversation. So that ask is really important. And then it's about bringing them to that space of, okay, so what could we do? Align it. So aligning is so important. So what could we do? Getting into a solution conversation. So what could we do in that space? And aligning that to the values, to the behaviors, to whatever kind of goal you're talking about, connected to what was expected of them at the beginning, okay? And then the final piece is act. So what are we going to do? What's the action plan? And how are we going to actually connect back after this conversation? So, because sometimes the feeling can be left and you're mulling it over and going back to the recipient's point of view, they may not be crystal clear. So it's making sure that you prep, you ask, actively listen, align, and act. That's how. So it's 4 simple pieces. But what's really important, and we were exploring it with a team yesterday, is that you can have that structure, and you have to get comfortable with the questions you want to ask, and that preparation is really important. But what's crucial then is not going by the list or going by the strict rules of that. It's a freedom within a framework. So it's then really dancing in the moment, as we call it in coaching, is when you get into that space of ask and actively listen. It's to sit back and let's see what comes out of the conversation. Truly, really listen to what the person is saying. And maybe you may need to go down another route and bring them back again, because you need to help them again with their psychological safety to truly meet them where they're at, because they could have so many other things that are going on in their head, and they will be able to share them in that space. So that is, so prep, ask, align, and act is the framework, but let's give permission to be free in that framework, if that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you. So what I got from it in the beginning, do your preparation, which probably takes like a minute or two, where you just write down where they are now or what you've noticed and what would you like from them in connection with values and strategic goals. And then this asking part, in practice, I'm missing that one. So usually managers just say, this is what I've noticed, go fix it. So the asking part, do you maybe can give us like an example of 2 or 3 questions, simple questions that one might use?
Yeah. So say for example, if it was okay, we need to there's a conflict in a team, and they're not actually they're avoiding it, for example, and they're not actually having that conversation with a team member.
So very common situation, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things, we avoid the conflict and we don't want to go into it. When it's okay, so you notice that. So I'm noticing you're not actually having those conversations with your team or with that person. So what's going on? What's holding you back from that? Because in the end, so and really get curious. Again, the curiosity piece goes in. So what's holding you back? Why? What could I do to help you in that space? So explore that in terms of asking, but then it's to kind of align it. It's to go, well, in this space, I would love, based on our values, based on being, respecting or creating psychological safety or being solution focused. This is where we need to get to. We need to have those conversations. So how can we have more of those conversations with that team to get the solutions? Instead of avoiding it, let's go into it. So does that make sense? Does that help?
It makes total sense. So basically, because I wanted to go to this aligning part, which basically is like an action plan that you co-create with the recipient of the feedback. Yeah. So basically, what are you or we gonna do until when? So what I'm thinking now is this act part, and you shed some light on this one already. That you connect back and that you track the progress. Another thing that I noticed, like in business environment, this is where perhaps we lack. So can we just speak more about the importance of coming back and reflecting, or just checking up on the progress?
Yeah, and it's so crucial. It's so when you do the action plan and you get it clear and making sure, okay, so how do you feel about this, and how can you move this forward? Okay, and there's a piece around the leader and the feedback givers going, so how can I support you in this? So it's keeping them in the driving seat, but allowing the manager then to support them in that space. But so what could we do afterwards? So naturally, what will happen is, in terms of holding each other accountable, the recipient may go, okay, well, let's check in, or the feedback giver can go, well, do you want to check in a week's time or in a month's time and see how you're doing in terms of progress, or reach out to me, at our weekly connect. Let me know what's going on, or at we do coffee sync. So it's like in the coffee sync structure, is there a time when we can see, well, how are you getting on? Because there's a piece around feedback. It's also, okay, so when sometimes if you don't have that follow-up, the questions start being raised at that space, and they may not really be clear or confident in moving forward. So you need to support them in that space. But also, I'm wondering, as you're talking, it's like to explore, well, who else could you get feedback from to help you in that space? So, so that the feedback is a positive thing. It's creating this feedback loop so that we can connect that and create kind of a rhythm of feedback into the space.
This awesome. And another natural transition to our section number 4, which is about establishing or maintaining a culture of feedback. How can you do that, and what's important when a company is trying to reach that loop that you just mentioned?
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is that, like, I think, again, stats, me, I love the stats, but 47% of people are recording, based on Gallup research, that they only get feedback once or twice or 3 times a year. That's what's coming up, is that they're not getting regular feedback. So it needs to become part of the rhythm of management, part of the rhythm of flow in the business. So in there, again, we talk about rhythm of management in terms of those meaningful conversations you have. So as a manager, how do you want to weave that into your weekly connects or monthly connects? Are you having those conversations? Because what I find as well is that we're having, managers will say, well, I'm having my check-ins, I'm having my meetings, but they are on the business. They're on the actual projects or they're on specific goals. There's a space where we need to have that kind of developmental conversation, that meaningful feedback conversation. So there needs to be nearly a dedicated time, and it doesn't have to be a long piece. You know this, Sabina. It can be 20 minutes. Okay, let's check in, and have, we call it a coffee sync, which is all about what I appreciate about you, but what I want more of and less of. So in that space, you're constantly you're building the muscle of creating a feedback culture, and you need to create a habit in that space.
Well, that's the hard part, creating a habit, because most of the companies have developmental conversations once per year, and then another one is this time next year. So it would be great, if we just keep it simple, because now it's also the time for those developmental conversations. If you can just add that last point to it, and add, when are we going to check in on your progress? So and that you try to do it within a month, let's say, to keep it more regular, to keep that muscle going.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's also, when you have only monthly, or sorry, every 6 months a progress update, or it's a year, most people are now moving into regular piece. So that wave of every quarter that they would have a proper check-in. But what's powerful here is you don't want any surprises. And when you weave this into weekly or bi-monthly, you've no surprises, and it's in the muscle. And it's the way you think. So it becomes more about the way of being in the company, and that you're always looking at improving and developing and growing. You're investing in your people in that space. And again, this is where the dopamine hits come in. It's the feed, it's the fuel. This is the fuel to keep everybody motivated in a time where people are struggling. There's with the remote working, it is hard. But I'm noticing that people are having more feedback, but it's having the meaningful feedback that's important. It's and bringing that into the culture of the company.
Great. So basically, with regularity of getting and giving feedback, we're building muscles, and we're becoming more comfortable with feedback. But what you're saying is we should also pay attention to having this meaningful feedback. So not just work or specific process oriented, but also more about the development of the employee, and with that also the organization, right?
Yeah. Okay. And I'm also, as you beautifully articulated that as well and summarized it, Sabina, the power here is the team lead to also be open for feedback. So it's not about giving feedback just to the team, it's creating this loop, so that they are seeing, because again, it's creating that psychological safe space so that they can calibrate their behaviors. So if their team are able to give feedback and share, okay, so what I would like more of and less of from you as well, then there's safe space. That's where the power comes in. That's where the magic happens, because both the team lead and the team are actually calibrating their behaviors in order to be a greater and a more effective and more powerful team.
That is amazing. And what I got from this is just human to human, not thinking so much team lead, employee, but everyone should use the model that you proposed. So it's not just for the team leads, because I think the pressure is more or less on them to give feedback, to notice all these things. But as we develop the culture of feedback, more emphasis, not to say pressure, should be more responsibility. I think this is the word that I'm searching for. More responsibility for also giving feedback should be on the employees as well, so the team members. So basically, prep, ask, align, and act is for everyone.
Exactly. And that's where you get a really powerful team, a thriving team, moving from that surviving to thriving mindset. And that's what we want, isn't it?
That is what we want. So I think we covered all of our 4 sections. I enjoyed this conversation with you a lot. Let me just ask you one final thing. Do you have a concluding thought or a recommendation that you would like this conversation to be ended with?
I'm thinking of Maya Angelou, actually. You know how she says people will never remember what you did, but you remember what you say, but they will always remember how you made them feel. That is what is feedback, and remembering that is really important.
Wonderful. So let's conclude with that thought. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was a pleasure and an honor, and I wish you lots of success with your business and life.
Thank you, Sabina. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.